One of the names on the top of Donald Trump's enemies list is former special counsel Jack Smith, the prosecutor who led the federal investigations into Trump's mishandling of classified information and his effort to overturn the 2020 election. And today, Jack Smith basically called Trump's lackeys on their bluff. I mean, in recent weeks, Macworld has bent over backwards to push Trump's narrative alleging Smith's investigations into him were politically motivated. The chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, Chuck Grassley, even put out this press release accusing Smith and his team of spying on Republican senators, something that Grassley and others have attempted to characterize as, quote, worse than Watergate. But as Grassley's own press release concedes, the, quote, spying wasn't wiretapping at all, as some have repeatedly claimed falsely. Smith's team obtained basic phone records between January 4th through January 7th of 2021, basically who you called and when, of certain elected Republicans who all reportedly attempted to help Trump in some way or another overturn the 2020 election.
We begin with major developments in President Trump's retribution campaign against his political foes. New York Attorney General Letitia James made her first court appearance yesterday, where she pled not guilty to federal charges of alleged mortgage fraud. The indictment was brought by interim U.S. Attorney Lindsay Halligan, a former member of Trump's legal team with no prosecutorial experience, who accused James of misleading a bank to secure favorable mortgage terms. James slammed the indictment as baseless and politically motivated.
All right, so buckle up, because what I'm about to tell you is absolutely insane. And I'm not throwing that word around lightly here. We're talking about recordings, secret audio recordings. Recordings that allegedly feature Donald Trump, the President of the United States, discussing illegal actions, admitting to cover-ups, acknowledging obstruction, and the person who has these recordings, former special counsel Jack Smith. Yeah, that Jack Smith, the guy Trump forced out, the guy who was investigating Trump for years, and apparently he kept the tapes. He refused to destroy them, and now those recordings are making their way through Washington like wildfire. This story broke just days ago, and it's already sending shockwaves through every corner of the political establishment. Democrats are calling it a smoking gun. Republicans are screaming deep state conspiracy. And Trump's legal team is in full panic mode right now, trying to figure out how bad this actually is. But before we go any further, real quick, let's be honest, you can't really trust mainstream media anymore. That's why we built Pump Politics, to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines, join our free newsletter. We'll send the news straight to your inbox every day. Just click the link in the description to join. And if you just want to support what we're doing, join us, be part of the community that actually cares about the truth. All right, let's get back to the video. So let me break down what we know so far, because this is complicated and there's a lot of moving pieces. Multiple outlets, we're talking CNN, Bloomberg, ABC News, they've all confirmed that Jack Smith secretly preserved audio recordings from his time as special counsel. These aren't random recordings. These are DOJ audio logs, official communications, classified conferences, phone calls, the kind of stuff that gets documented and archived during major federal investigations. And according to these reports, Smith held on to recordings that allegedly captured Trump discussing evidence suppression, talking about withholding classified documents, giving directives to staff that prosecutors are calling overt acts of obstruction. This isn't hearsay. This isn't anonymous sources making vague claims. This is audio, recorded, timestamped, documented. And if these recordings are real, if they're authenticated, this could be the biggest legal bombshell of Trump's entire presidency, maybe his entire political career. Now, here's where this gets even crazier. Jack Smith gave an interview to the New Republic back on October 14th, and in that interview, he said something really interesting. He said he had tons of evidence showing Trump knew his actions were illegal when he withheld classified defense materials. He used the phrase willfulness in its purest form. Think about that for a second. Willfulness. That's a legal term. That means Trump wasn't just careless. He wasn't just ignorant. He knew what he was doing was illegal, and he did it anyway. That's the difference between a mistake and a crime. And if Smith has audio recordings of Trump admitting that, if he has Trump on tape acknowledging that he knew he was breaking the law, that's not just evidence. That's a confession. That's the kind of thing that ends political careers. That's the kind of thing that leads to criminal charges, impeachment, prison time, the whole 9 yards. But wait, there's more. Because according to Bloomberg, and they cited internal DOJ sources, Smith's team didn't just have random audio clips. They documented everything. They had timestamps. They had summaries of Trump's private directives to staff, instructions that prosecutors considered acts of obstruction. And all of this was sealed by the DOJ before Smith was forced to resign. Sealed, which means somebody at the Justice Department decided this evidence was too sensitive to be made public, too dangerous, too explosive. And now it's out there. Now congressional investigators are quietly reviewing it. Now people are starting to ask the question, what exactly is on these tapes? What did Trump say? What did he admit to? And why has this been kept hidden for so long? And then there's this wild detail that came out on October 23rd, a broadcast from Players Unlimited, which, is a sports media outlet, but they have sources too. They describe this as an accidental confession caught on tape during East Wing chaos. East Wing chaos, that tells you something right there. This wasn't a formal deposition. This wasn't Trump sitting down with investigators knowing he was being recorded. This was Trump in the middle of running the White House, giving orders, making decisions, and not realizing that every word was being documented. That's how these things happen. That's how people get caught. They think they're safe. They think they're in control. And then months or years later, the tapes come out and suddenly everything they said is being replayed in front of Congress, in front of the media, in front of the entire country. So where does this leave us right now? Well, it leaves us with a lot of questions and not a lot of answers yet. We don't have the actual recordings. We haven't heard the audio ourselves. We don't know exactly what Trump said or in what context. But what we do know is that multiple credible outlets are reporting that these recordings exist. We know Jack Smith refused to destroy them even after he was forced out. We know congressional investigators are now looking at this material, and we know that if these recordings are authenticated, if they hold up under scrutiny, then we're looking at potentially the most damning evidence against a sitting president in modern American history. This isn't about political spin anymore. This isn't about partisan investigations. This is about audio recordings, hard evidence. And if Trump is on tape admitting to crimes, discussing cover-ups, ordering obstruction, then the entire conversation around presidential accountability is about to change. Because you can spin a lot of things, you can deny documents, you can attack witnesses, but you can't really spin away your own voice on a recording admitting to illegal activity. That's why this story matters. That's why this is so explosive. And that's why we need to dig into every detail of what's being reported. So stick with me, because we're about to break down exactly what these recordings allegedly contain, who has access to them now, and what this means for Trump's legal future. Okay, so let's get into the specifics of what we're actually dealing with here, because the details matter a lot. When we talk about these recordings, we're not talking about some random person with a phone secretly taping a conversation. We're talking about official DOJ audio logs. The Department of Justice keeps records of everything during major investigations. Phone calls get logged, meetings get recorded, conferences get documented. This is standard procedure, especially when you're dealing with classified information and potential criminal activity at the highest levels of government. So when Jack Smith was running his investigation into Trump, into the classified documents case, into the obstruction allegations, all of that, he had access to all these official recordings. And apparently when his investigation was shut down and he was forced to resign, he made a decision. He decided not to destroy those recordings. He kept them. He preserved them. And now they're coming back to haunt the Trump administration. So what exactly is allegedly on these tapes? Well, according to the CNN report from October 23rd, the recordings capture Trump discussing evidence suppression related to foreign dealings and military documents. Evidence suppression? That's a polite way of saying cover-up. That means Trump allegedly talked about hiding evidence, burying documents, making sure certain information didn't get out, and he did this in relation to foreign dealings, which probably means interactions with foreign governments, foreign officials, stuff that could compromise national security or reveal corrupt relationships. In military documents, we're talking classified defense materials, the kind of stuff that's supposed to be locked down tight, the kind of stuff that presidents aren't supposed to just take home and show to their friends or discuss casually. This is serious classified information. And if Trump is on tape talking about suppressing evidence related to all of this, then we're looking at multiple potential crimes: obstruction of justice, mishandling of classified information, conspiracy to hide evidence. All of that could be on these recordings. Now let's go back to that Jack Smith interview with the New Republic, because this is where things get really interesting. Smith didn't just say he had evidence. He said he had tons of evidence. Tons. That's not a small amount. That's not a couple of questionable documents or a single witness statement. That's overwhelming evidence. Mountains of it. And he specifically said this evidence shows Trump knew his actions were illegal when he was withholding those classified defense materials. Too new. That's the key word. Because in criminal law, intent matters. If you accidentally break a rule, that's one thing. If you knowingly, willfully, intentionally break the law, that's a crime. And Smith described Trump's actions as willfulness in its purest form. That's about as damning as you can get from a prosecutor. That's Smith basically saying Trump knew exactly what he was doing, knew it was illegal, and did it anyway. And if Smith has audio recordings that back up that claim, recordings of Trump admitting he knew he shouldn't be doing what he was doing, then that's game over from a legal standpoint. But here's where it gets even more complicated. Bloomberg reported that Smith's team documented audio timestamps and summaries of Trump's private directives to staff. Private directives? That means Trump wasn't just talking about this stuff in abstract terms. He was giving orders. He was instructing his staff to do specific things. And prosecutors considered those directives to be overt obstruction acts. Overt. That means open, obvious, clear-cut obstruction. Not borderline behavior. Not something you could spin as a misunderstanding. Actual, deliberate acts of obstruction. And all of this was documented, timestamped, and then sealed by the DOJ before Smith left. Which raises a huge question. Why was it sealed? Who made that decision? Was it because the evidence was so damaging that they needed to protect it? Or was it because someone at the DOJ wanted to bury it and hope it never saw the light of day? And then we have this detail about the recordings being an accidental confession caught during East Wing chaos. Think about what that means. The East Wing is part of the White House. That's where a lot of presidential business happens. And chaos suggests this wasn't a calm, controlled environment. This was Trump in the middle of a crisis, surrounded by staff, making decisions on the fly, and not thinking about the fact that everything was being recorded. That's when people slip up. That's when they say things they wouldn't normally say if they knew they were on the record. And if Smith has recordings of Trump in those moments, unguarded, stressed, speaking freely, then those recordings could be incredibly revealing. They could show Trump's real thought process, his real motivations, the things he would never admit in a formal interview or a courtroom testimony. So now the question becomes, what happens next? Because we're at this weird point where these recordings allegedly exist. Multiple outlets are confirming their existence, but we haven't actually heard them yet. The public hasn't heard them. Congress might be reviewing them behind closed doors, but nothing has been released officially. And that's where things get tricky. Because if these recordings are as damning as they're being described, someone is going to want to make them public. Congressional Democrats would love to hold hearings and play these tapes for the entire country. They would love to force Trump and his allies to answer for what's on those recordings. But there are also legal issues here. These recordings might still be classified. They might be subject to executive privilege. Trump's lawyers are probably already arguing that the recordings were obtained improperly, that they should be inadmissible, that they violate attorney-client privilege or some other legal protection. And let's talk about the timing of all this because it matters. These reports are dropping in late October 2025. We're heading into the midterm election season. Trump is in the middle of his second term. His approval ratings have been all over the place. And now, suddenly, there are reports of secret recordings that could prove he committed crimes. Is that a coincidence? Maybe, maybe not. It's possible that Smith or his allies strategically decided to leak information about these recordings now to maximize political damage, or it's possible that congressional investigators stumbled onto this material and reporters got wind of it. Either way, the timing is going to feed into the narrative that this is all political. Republicans are already saying this is just another witch hunt, another attempt to take down Trump using manufactured evidence. Democrats are saying this is long overdue accountability for a president who has been above the law for too long. And both sides are going to use this story to energize their base heading into the midterms. But here's what we can't lose sight of. If these recordings are real, if they're authenticated, if they actually contain what's being reported, then the politics don't really matter because either Trump committed crimes or he didn't. Either there's audio of him admitting to obstruction and evidence suppression or there isn't. And if there is, then we have to deal with that. We have to figure out what it means for a sitting president to be caught on tape confessing to federal crimes. Do we prosecute? Do we impeach? Do we just shrug and say, well, he's the president, so I guess he's above the law? Those are the questions that are going to define the next phase of this story. And those are the questions that go way beyond Trump. They're questions about the integrity of our entire justice system and whether anyone, even the most powerful person in the country, can be held accountable when the evidence is overwhelming. All right, so let's break down what all of this actually means and why it matters so much. Because, yeah, the recordings are dramatic, the allegations are explosive, but there's bigger stuff at play here that affects how our entire government works. First, let's talk about the issue of presidential accountability. This has been a running theme throughout Trump's entire political career. Can you prosecute a sitting president? The DOJ has a long-standing policy that says no, you can't indict a sitting president. It's not a law. It's not in the Constitution. It's just a policy memo from the 1970s, but it's been treated like gospel for decades. The argument is that prosecuting a sitting president would interfere with their ability to do their job, that it would create too much chaos, that it would undermine the executive branch. And for the most part, that policy has held. We've never actually tested it in a real case with overwhelming evidence. But now, with these recordings allegedly showing Trump confessing to crimes, we might be about to test it. Because if the evidence is truly ironclad, if there's no way to deny what's on those tapes, then the question becomes, does that policy still make sense? Should a president really be immune from prosecution? if there's audio of them admitting to federal crimes? And this isn't just an academic question. This is about whether we still believe in the rule of law. Do we believe that everyone is equal under the law? Or do we believe that some people are just too powerful to be held accountable? Because if Trump can be caught on tape discussing obstruction, evidence suppression, mishandling classified documents, and nothing happens to him because he's the president, then what message does that send? It sends the message that if you're powerful enough, the law doesn't apply to you. It sends the message that accountability is only for regular people, not for presidents. And that's a really dangerous precedent, because the next president could be worse. The next president could do even more blatant illegal things and point to Trump as an example of why they shouldn't be prosecuted either. And before you know it, the entire idea of presidential accountability just disappears. We end up with an executive branch that's completely above the law, and that's not a democracy anymore. That's something else entirely. Second, let's talk about what this means for the DOJ and the FBI, because these institutions are already under incredible strain. Half the country thinks they've been weaponized against Trump. The other half thinks they've been too soft on Trump. And now we find out that Jack Smith, one of the most prominent prosecutors in recent history, secretly kept recordings that were supposed to be sealed or destroyed. Is that the right thing to do? Well, it depends on who you ask. If you think Trump is a criminal who has been evading justice, then yeah, Smith preserving that evidence is heroic. He's making sure the truth doesn't get buried. He's protecting evidence that could hold a corrupt president accountable. But if you think this is all a political witch hunt, then Smith keeping those recordings looks like insubordination. It looks like a rogue prosecutor refusing to let go of his investigation even after he was told to stand down. And that raises serious questions about the independence and impartiality of the Justice Department. Can we trust these institutions if prosecutors are making their own decisions about what evidence to preserve and what to destroy based on their personal beliefs about a case? And then there's the issue of leaks. Because how did this story get out? Who told CNN and Bloomberg and all these other outlets about the recordings? Was it Smith himself? Was it someone on his team? Was it a congressional staffer who saw the material during an investigation? Whoever it was, they leaked information about an ongoing investigation, or at least an investigation that was supposed to be closed, and that's illegal. It's also exactly the kind of thing Trump has been complaining about for years. He's always said the DOJ and the FBI leak like sieves, that they selectively release information to damage him politically. And now here we are with a massive leak about secret recordings right before the midterms. So even if the recordings are real, even if they prove Trump committed crimes, the way this information got out is still a problem, because it undermines public trust in these institutions. It makes people wonder if justice is really being served, or if this is all just political warfare disguised as law enforcement. Third, let's talk about Congress and what they're going to do with this information. The House Oversight Committee is reportedly reviewing these recordings, and if they decide to hold hearings, if they decide to make this material public, that's going to be an absolute circus. You're going to have Democrats demanding that Trump be impeached or prosecuted based on what's on the tapes. You're going to have Republicans attacking the credibility of the recordings, questioning how they were obtained, arguing that they've been edited or taken out of context. And you're going to have legal experts and constitutional scholars arguing about whether Congress even has the authority to use this evidence, whether it's admissible, whether it violates executive privilege. It's going to be weeks or months of hearings and testimony and legal battles. And at the end of it all, we might not actually get any real resolution. Because even if Congress decides Trump should be prosecuted, they can't do it themselves. They can refer the case to the DOJ, but the DOJ might say, no, we're not going to indict a sitting president. And then we're back to square one. Fourth, let's talk about the political fallout. Because regardless of what the legal outcome is, this story is going to dominate the news cycle for a long time, and that has consequences. For Trump, this is yet another scandal, yet another legal battle, yet another distraction from actually governing. His approval ratings are probably going to take a hit. His opponents are going to use this as ammunition in the midterms and in the 2028 election. His supporters are going to rally around him even harder, convinced that this is proof of a deep state conspiracy to take him down. For Democrats, this is an opportunity. They can point to these recordings as evidence that they've been right about Trump all along. They can argue that this proves Trump is unfit for office, that he's a criminal who should never have been president. They can use this to energize their base and drive turnout in the midterms. But they also have to be careful, because if they overplay their hand, if they make this all about taking down Trump and not about the actual evidence and the rule of law, then they risk looking like they're just as partisan as the Republicans they criticize. And finally, let's talk about what this means for the average American. Because at the end of the day, most people don't care about the legal technicalities. They don't care about DOJ policies or executive privilege or congressional subpoenas. What they care about is whether their president is a criminal, whether the person running the country is trustworthy, whether justice still exists in America, and if these recordings are as damning as they're being described. If Trump is really on tape admitting to crimes, then a lot of Americans are going to feel betrayed. They're going to feel like they were lied to. They're going to feel like the system failed them by allowing someone like that to become president in the first place. But at the same time, a lot of Americans are going to feel vindicated. They're going to feel like their suspicions were right all along. They're going to feel like finally, there's proof of what they've been saying for years. So where does that leave us? It leaves us in this really uncomfortable place where we have explosive allegations, credible reporting, but no actual proof yet. We're waiting to see if these recordings get released. We're waiting to see what's actually on them. We're waiting to see if they live up to the hype or if this is just another overblown scandal that fizzles out. And while we wait, both sides are digging in. Both sides are preparing for battle, because everyone knows that if these tapes are real, if they're as bad as the report suggests, this isn't just another Trump controversy. This is a constitutional crisis. This is a reckoning with the question of whether presidents can be held accountable for crimes. And that's a question that's going to define American politics for years to come. So yeah, buckle up. This story is just getting started, and knowing how these things go, it's going to get a lot messier before we get any real answers.